Jake's mornings were always the same. The faint sound of his alarm, the creak of his old apartment floorboards, and the smell of stale coffee from the corner pot filled his modest space. He worked as a delivery man, riding a second-hand bike that groaned under the weight of his deliveries. Though his life wasn't luxurious, Jake carried a quiet pride in his work ethic. To him, hard work was a badge of honor. His hometown wasn't large, but its social divides felt insurmountable. Growing up in a small apartment with his widowed mother, Jake had learned early on how to make do with less. His classmates had often mocked his threadbare clothes and his mother's beaten-down sedan. Among them was Lisa, a girl whose family owned the largest real estate firm in town. To Jake, Lisa represented a life he could never have, shiny, unattainable, and condescending. One fateful afternoon, Jake found himself in front of a gleaming cafe in town. Clad in his delivery uniform, he adjusted the heavy bag of packages on his shoulder. As he stepped inside, he froze. There she was, Lisa, surrounded by her glamorous friends, each clad in designer clothes. The years since high school had done little to dull her beauty or her sharp tongue. Jake felt a wave of self-consciousness but forced himself to continue his task. Lisa spotted him almost instantly. Her laughter, tinkling like wind chimes, stopped abruptly. "Jake? Is that you?" she exclaimed, loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. Her friends turned to look, curiosity sparking in their eyes. Jake nodded, offering a polite smile, hoping this encounter would be brief. "Still riding that bike around town?" Lisa's voice dripped with amusement. "It's been years." "No car yet?" The words stung more than Jake cared to admit, but he kept his composure. "Not yet," he replied simply, his voice calm but firm. Lisa, unsatisfied with his lack of reaction, leaned back in her chair, twirling a strand of hair around her manicured finger. "A man who can't even afford a car isn't much of a man at all," she declared, earning chuckles from her friends. Jake finished his delivery and left the cafe, his heart heavy with humiliation. He resolved in that moment to change his life, though he didn't yet know how. As Jake rode home, Lisa's words echoed in his mind. They weren't new, they were a continuation of the taunts he had endured in high school. Back then, Lisa had been the ringleader of a group that delighted in pointing out Jake's patched-up backpack or his scuffed sneakers. At the time, Jake had brushed it off, telling himself he would prove them wrong someday. His childhood had been one of sacrifices. His mother, a waitress at a diner, had worked double shifts to make sure Jake had food on the table and a roof over his head. Though they lived paycheck to paycheck, she always told him, "You're rich if you have integrity and grit." Jake clung to those words, even when they felt hollow. Now, years later, the sting of humiliation felt sharper than ever. Lisa's public ridicule had reawakened a determination Jake thought he'd buried. He didn't want revenge, he wanted redemption, to rise above the image she had of him, not to prove her wrong, but to prove himself right. The day after their cafe encounter, Lisa's words became the talk of the town. Small-town gossip traveled fast, and Jake's humiliation was the latest subject of interest. At every delivery stop, he felt the weight of pitying or mocking stares. At first, Jake wanted to retreat, to avoid the whispers, but his mother's voice rang in his ears, "Stand tall, no matter what." One day, as Jake walked into the diner where his mother once worked, he overheard two patrons talking. "Did you hear what Lisa said to that delivery guy? Poor kid, can't even afford a car." Jake's face burned with shame, but he held his head high. He refused to let their words define him. As he left the diner, he resolved that his future wouldn't be determined by Lisa or anyone else. The path forward would be difficult, but Jake was no stranger to hard work. That night, Jake stayed up late, scouring job listings online. His delivery job paid the bills, but it left no room for growth. After hours of searching, he found a position at a small tech startup in a neighboring city. It required no formal degree, just a willingness to learn and adapt. Jake hesitated for a moment, doubting his ability, but he sent in his application anyway. 2 weeks later, he got the call. The startup offered him a position as a trainee. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay wasn't much better than his delivery job, but it was a start. Jake threw himself into his new role, soaking up every piece of knowledge he could. His coworkers noticed his dedication, and his managers began to rely on him for more significant tasks. Despite the long hours and steep learning curve, Jake felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced before. Each small victory at work felt like a step toward the life he had always dreamed of. Jake's first day at the tech startup was a whirlwind. The office, a far cry from the quiet monotony of his delivery routes, buzzed with energy. His desk was tucked away in a corner, a small space where he could quietly observe the operations. While others chatted confidently about coding languages and innovative marketing strategies, Jake absorbed it all in silence. The first weeks were humbling. His lack of formal education made him feel like an outsider, but Jake leaned on his resilience. He stayed late, poring over manuals and online courses, refusing to let his insecurities dictate his success. Over time, his colleagues began to notice his unwavering determination. One of them, a project manager named Claire, took Jake under her wing. Claire wasn't much older than Jake, but her sharp wit and clear expertise commanded respect. "You remind me of me when I started here," she said one evening as they reviewed a project together. "Stick with it, Jake. You've got the heart for this." Her words lit a spark in Jake, validating his efforts and strengthening his resolve. Not every day at the startup was smooth. Jake often found himself struggling to keep up with his more experienced peers. Mistakes were inevitable, and his perfectionist tendencies magnified their impact. One evening, after misconfiguring a client report, Jake stayed behind in the empty office to fix his error. The silence of the office weighed heavily on him as he worked. Thoughts of Lisa and her cutting words crept into his mind, but they didn't defeat him this time. Instead, they fueled him. "You're better than this," he whispered to himself. By morning, he had resolved the issue. The relief was short-lived as his manager called him into a meeting. Expecting reprimand, Jake was surprised when his manager acknowledged his initiative. "You owned your mistake and fixed it," the manager said. "That's rare. Keep it up." Months turned into a year, and Jake's work ethic began to pay off. His name came up in meetings more frequently, and he was trusted with larger responsibilities. Jake's dedication wasn't driven by spite for Lisa but by a desire to rewrite his story. When his manager promoted him to a junior role overseeing logistics, Jake couldn't believe it. His first instinct was to call his mother. "I'm proud of you, Jake," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've always had it in you." That evening, Jake allowed himself a rare indulgence, a quiet moment of celebration. He had rented a small car for the week, a luxury for someone accustomed to his bicycle. Driving home, he thought about the boy who had been mocked for not owning a car and smiled to himself. Jake's first major project as a junior manager came with challenges he couldn't have anticipated. A new client, known for their stringent standards, demanded a near-impossible turnaround for a logistics overhaul. The team was stretched thin, and tension ran high in the office. Though intimidated, Jake volunteered to spearhead the effort. He worked tirelessly, coordinating with suppliers and negotiating deadlines with finesse. His colleagues were skeptical at first but soon rallied behind his unyielding optimism. "If Jake believes we can pull this off, maybe we can," one of them said. When the project was delivered on time, exceeding the client's expectations, Jake received a standing ovation in the team meeting. It wasn't just the success that mattered to him, it was the realization that he belonged, that he could thrive in this new world he had fought to enter. Despite his growing success, the memory of Lisa's humiliation lingered in Jake's mind. It wasn't bitterness that kept it alive, but the stark contrast it provided to his present reality. Each time he felt doubt creeping in, her words served as a reminder of how far he had come. One evening, as he scrolled through social media, Jake stumbled upon a post from an old classmate. It was a photo of Lisa at a lavish party, champagne flute in hand, her smile as radiant as ever. The caption read, "Living the high life with our favorite queen." Jake felt a pang of something. Was it anger? Envy? Neither, he realized. It was pity. Lisa was trapped in the same superficial world she had always glorified, while Jake had discovered a life of purpose and growth. With his career on an upward trajectory, Jake began to think about the life he wanted outside of work. He moved into a small but cozy apartment in the city, traded his rented car for a modest second-hand vehicle, and started volunteering at a community center on weekends. At the center, Jake taught job skills to young adults from underprivileged backgrounds. Seeing their determination reminded him of his younger self, struggling to find a foothold in a world that seemed stacked against him. "You can do more than survive," he told them. "You can thrive." This new chapter of Jake's life was fulfilling in ways he hadn't anticipated. For the first time, he felt truly free, not from financial struggles but from the need to prove his worth to others. It had been 2 years since Jake last saw Lisa. One crisp fall morning, while sipping coffee in a small cafe near his office, he heard a familiar laugh. His stomach tightened. Turning toward the sound, he spotted Lisa sitting at a nearby table. She was alone this time, no glamorous entourage, her polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. Lisa didn't notice him at first, but when she did, her reaction was immediate. Her eyes narrowed, scanning his attire, no longer a delivery uniform but a sharp, tailored suit. Jake nodded politely, hoping the moment would pass without incident, but Lisa stood up and approached his table. "Well, look who's dressed for success," she said, her tone laced with forced charm. Jake smiled faintly. "Just grabbing coffee before work," he replied, keeping his words neutral. Lisa hesitated, her confidence faltering for the first time. "You work nearby?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "I do," Jake said, then politely excused himself, leaving Lisa staring after him, her thoughts clearly unsettled. Lisa's life wasn't the glittering fairy tale she made it out to be. Her fiancé had left her months ago, citing irreconcilable differences that boiled down to her constant need for validation. Her family's real estate firm was in financial trouble, and she was forced to take on a mid-level management role to help stabilize it. The transition from a life of luxury to one of responsibility wasn't easy for Lisa. Accustomed to admiration and indulgence, she now faced the cold reality of budgets, deadlines, and disgruntled employees. Worse, whispers about her fall from grace began circulating in the town, the same gossip mill that had once amplified her triumphs now relishing her struggles. That morning at the cafe, seeing Jake thriving while her own life felt like it was crumbling, had shaken her deeply. She had always dismissed him as insignificant, yet there he was, exuding a quiet confidence she couldn't fake. A week later, Jake received an unexpected email. It was from a local business association inviting him to a networking gala. His company's recent success had earned them recognition, and Jake, as the project lead, was selected to represent them. Though he wasn't one for formal events, he accepted, understanding the importance of building connections. The evening of the gala arrived, and Jake found himself navigating a sea of suits and evening gowns. He exchanged pleasantries with fellow attendees, feeling more at ease than he had anticipated. Then, as he turned to grab a glass of water from the bar, he froze. Lisa was there. She spotted him almost immediately, her face a mixture of surprise and something else, unease. Jake's first instinct was to avoid her, but Lisa approached him, clutching a flute of champagne as if it were a lifeline. "Jake," she began, her voice wavering. "I didn't know you'd be here." The conversation started awkwardly, Lisa making half-hearted remarks about the gala's grandeur. Jake listened politely, his demeanor calm but distant. Then the evening took an unexpected turn. As the keynote speaker took the stage, he began praising the achievements of rising local businesses. To lead a project like this requires vision, resilience, and the ability to inspire others, the speaker said. "Please join me in congratulating Jake Carter from Technova." Applause erupted as Jake stood, and for the first time, Lisa looked at him not with derision, but with disbelief. As Jake returned to his seat, Lisa was visibly shaken. She had spent years mocking his lack of material success, yet here he was, celebrated for qualities she had never valued. Lisa couldn't stop thinking about Jake in the days following the gala. His quiet confidence and the respect he commanded from his peers contrasted sharply with the image she had of him as a boy riding a rusted bicycle. The guilt of her past actions gnawed at her. One evening, after much deliberation, she decided to reach out. It wasn't easy for Lisa to confront her pride, but something about Jake's success and the grace with which he carried himself inspired her. She wrote and rewrote a message before finally sending a simple text, "Can we talk? I owe you an apology." Jake was surprised to see Lisa's name on his phone screen. After a moment's hesitation, he replied, "Sure. Let's meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the cafe." The next day, Lisa arrived at the cafe early, her nerves fraying with each passing minute. When Jake walked in, she stood, unsure whether to offer a handshake or a hug. Jake settled for a polite nod and sat down. "Thank you for meeting me," Lisa began, her voice hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you back then. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Truly." Jake regarded her quietly, his expression unreadable. "It's in the past," he said after a pause. "But I appreciate the apology." Lisa was taken aback by his calm demeanor, expecting anger or at least some resentment. Instead, Jake's acceptance felt like a reflection of the strength she lacked. Lisa's apology hung in the air, the weight of her sincerity evident in the trembling of her voice. Jake nodded slowly, his calm demeanor unshaken. "We all make mistakes, Lisa. What matters is what we do after." Lisa blinked back unexpected tears. "You're kinder than I deserve," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I spent so much of my life trying to climb a ladder that didn't even matter, only to realize I was stepping on people like you to get there." Jake offered a small smile. "Life has a way of teaching us, doesn't it? The truth is, I never let your words define me. They hurt, yes, but they pushed me to grow. So, in a strange way, I should thank you." Lisa stared at him, the simplicity of his forgiveness both humbling and inspiring. After their conversation, Lisa left the cafe feeling lighter yet introspective. For the first time in years, she felt the urge to reflect on her life's trajectory. The facade she had built, the wealth, the status, now seemed hollow. She couldn't shake the image of Jake's quiet dignity, a stark contrast to her own frantic grasp for validation. Over the following weeks, Lisa began making small changes. She distanced herself from toxic acquaintances, started volunteering at a local shelter, and even attended financial management workshops to stabilize her family's faltering business. Though her progress was slow, each step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd lost long ago. Jake, meanwhile, carried on with his life, unaware of the impact their conversation had on Lisa. He wasn't one to dwell on the past. His focus was on building a future that mattered, both for himself and for those he could help along the way. As the months passed, Lisa found herself drawn to the community center Jake had once volunteered at. At first, she felt out of place, her designer clothes and polished demeanor a stark contrast to the humble surroundings. But as she began to engage with the young adults there, she discovered a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. One day, while mentoring a young girl struggling with self-esteem, Lisa heard her own words echoed back to her. "People say I'm not smart enough or pretty enough. Maybe they're right." Lisa's chest tightened. "They're not right," she said firmly, kneeling to meet the girl's eyes. "You are more than what anyone says about you. Don't let them decide who you are." It was a moment of catharsis, a way to give back what she had once taken from others. Jake's career continued to flourish. His promotion to a senior role at Technova marked a significant milestone, but he remained grounded, always mindful of his roots. His weekends were spent mentoring at the community center, where he found joy in helping others find their footing, just as he had once done for himself. One Saturday, while preparing for a workshop, Jake noticed a familiar figure in the crowd. Lisa was there, guiding a group of teenagers through a budgeting exercise. Their eyes met briefly, and she offered a small, genuine smile. Jake nodded in acknowledgement, silently impressed by the transformation he saw in her. Jake's influence extended beyond the walls of the community center. His story began to inspire others in the town, sparking a movement of empowerment and growth. Small businesses flourished under his mentorship, and young professionals looked to him as a role model for resilience and humility. Lisa, too, found her place in this renewed community spirit. Though their paths rarely crossed, Jake and Lisa became unwitting allies in fostering change. Their shared past served as a reminder that even the most fractured relationships could yield something meaningful. Years passed, and though Jake and Lisa seldom interacted, their mutual respect remained. At a charity event hosted by the community center, they shared a brief conversation, reflecting on how far they had both come. "Funny how life works," Lisa mused, holding a cup of coffee. "If you told me 10 years ago I'd be here, helping others instead of chasing wealth, I wouldn't have believed you." Jake smiled. "It's not about where you started or even where you end up. It's about the journey, and what you choose to learn from it." Jake's definition of success had evolved. It wasn't about wealth or accolades, though he had earned both. It was about the lives he touched, the change he inspired. His mother's words echoed in his mind often, "You're rich if you have integrity and grit." For Lisa, success now meant something entirely different as well. She measured it in the smiles of the young people she mentored, the stability she brought to her family's business, and the peace she found in giving rather than taking. Jake stood in front of a room filled with young entrepreneurs, his final workshop before retiring from community mentoring. "Your circumstances don't define you," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "It's what you do with them that matters. Never let someone else's judgment decide your worth." In the back of the room, Lisa listened quietly, a sense of gratitude washing over her. Jake's journey had inspired hers, and she vowed to carry forward the lessons she had learned from him. As Jake walked off the stage, he caught Lisa's eye one last time. No words were exchanged, but the understanding between them was clear. Jake's story began to take on a life of its own. A journalist who had attended one of his workshops wrote an article about his journey, titled, "From Humiliation to Inspiration, The Tale of Jake Carter." The piece went viral, resonating with people far beyond his small town. Suddenly, Jake found himself fielding invitations to speak at conferences and community events across the country. Despite his growing fame, he remained grounded. Each opportunity to share his story felt like another chance to remind people of their own potential. Meanwhile, Lisa's transformation continued to unfold. Inspired by Jake's example, she started a scholarship program for underprivileged youth, providing them with the educational opportunities she had once taken for granted. Her efforts garnered attention, and soon she became a mentor to a network of young leaders. The town itself began to change. Jake's influence sparked a wave of local entrepreneurship. Small businesses thrived, and the community center expanded its programs. People who had once been content to live in the shadows of their circumstances began stepping forward, inspired by Jake's message of resilience. Lisa's contributions added another layer of growth. Her scholarship recipients often returned to the community to give back, creating a ripple effect of kindness and opportunity. Though Jake and Lisa rarely crossed paths, their separate efforts became two sides of the same coin, both dedicated to uplifting those around them. One day, the mayor unveiled a plaque in honor of Jake's contributions, calling him a symbol of change and perseverance. Jake accepted the recognition with humility, emphasizing that the true credit belonged to the community for embracing the spirit of transformation. Lisa's journey brought her full circle when she encountered a young girl who reminded her of her younger self. The girl was bright and driven but plagued by self-doubt, a victim of constant ridicule by her peers. Lisa saw in her the reflection of her own insecurities, the ones that had once fueled her cruelty toward Jake. She took the girl under her wing, encouraging her to channel her pain into something meaningful. Over time, the girl blossomed, becoming a leader among her peers. Watching her transformation, Lisa felt a profound sense of fulfillment. It was as if she had finally made amends, not just to Jake, but to the part of herself she had neglected for so long. Jake, meanwhile, continued to mentor others, finding joy in the success of those he helped. His life became a testament to the idea that greatness isn't about rising above others but lifting them with you. Years later, at a charity gala hosted to celebrate the community center's 20th anniversary, Jake and Lisa found themselves seated at the same table. The room buzzed with energy as old friends and new faces mingled, but the atmosphere between Jake and Lisa was calm, almost serene. They spoke about the years that had passed, the lives they had touched, and the lessons they had learned. "It's funny," Lisa said, swirling her wine glass, "how one moment can change everything. That day at the cafe, I didn't expect it to become the turning point of my life." Jake chuckled softly. Life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes it's the smallest encounters that lead to the biggest changes. As the evening wore on, their conversation turned reflective. There was no need for apologies or explanations, they had both grown far beyond their past. Jake's later years were spent in quiet contentment. He retired from his corporate role to focus on his passion for mentoring, eventually writing a book chronicling his journey. The book, Rising Above: Lessons from a Life Rebuilt, became a bestseller, inspiring countless readers to reevaluate their own lives. Lisa, too, found peace in her work. Her scholarship program expanded nationwide, and her mentorship network grew into a thriving community of changemakers. Though she rarely spoke about her past, those who knew her well understood that her transformation had been a deeply personal journey. One day, while visiting the community center, Jake sat with a young boy struggling with self-doubt. "You know," Jake said, "there was a time when people thought I'd never amount to much. But it doesn't matter what they think. It matters what you do." The boy nodded, his eyes shining with newfound determination. Jake smiled, knowing his legacy would live on not in monuments or awards, but in the lives he had touched. As Jake walked out into the crisp autumn air, he looked back at the center, his heart full. He didn't need to see Lisa to feel her impact. It was woven into the fabric of the community they had helped rebuild together. Their lives, once so entwined with conflict, had become a testament to the power of forgiveness, growth, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit.